If you think Germany is all about beer, brats, and Oktoberfest, well, you haven't seen their beautiful gardens. Coming up next, we're going to take a tour. Guten Tag. Well, that's German for good day. I'm Alan Smith. In today's show, we've got a special treat for you. We're going to visit some wonderful gardens in Germany and see some great examples of garden design German style. And I'm not just talking about public gardens. I visited some beautiful private gardens where designers and homeowners are as excited about and inspired by good garden design as we Americans. And I'll show you this creative topiary garden and show you a way to create an easy topiary all your own. And if you like color, you'll want to see this field of geraniums. Oh, and this one full of impatiens. They're all a part of a breeding program here where the finest genetics are being developed. And what do you think of this colossal basket of cabbage? Well, that could only mean one thing, sauerkraut, and we'll touch on that a little later. We're off to Germany to take a look at this incredible topiary garden right after this break. I visited a small garden in Germany where the homeowners are fanatical about topiary. I don't think I've seen better examples of the art of topiary by self-taught gardeners in my 20-plus years of garden design. When I spoke with the homeowner, Dr. Wolfgang Borchardt, he explained where much of the inspiration for his home and garden came from. This garden has so much personality, and it comes through with all these whimsical characters that have been placed in the garden.
I must tell you, we saw topiary in California. We have many ideas from our vacations.
I see.
And brought that home and tried how we can do it here in a way which is typical for us, but the ideas somehow come from our vacations. She also is working on these animals with the scissors. You have to work a lot on it, and that's all my wife doing.
Keeping them clipped and trimmed and shaped, yeah. Now, some of the newest additions to the garden include a crocodile and a peacock.
Yeah. This peacock was a bird made from liguster, and the bird was killed by the winter time. I took ivy and made this peacock from the long branches of this ivy.
I see. Well, the ivy is so tough and resilient, and that's a plant that people can use in just about any part of the world to make topiary. Well, Wolfgang, it sounds like you have tried lots of things, and through successes and failures, come to understand what plants work the best for your topiary. You use the ivy and the buxus or boxwood to great success.
The same is it with flowers. We have not much light here because of the trees. And the only flowers which can exist here are these impatiens. But here mostly we have only a chance with ivy and with ferns.
Those sonic impatiens are very good. The blooms are huge. And the white color palette you've used here makes the garden sparkle.
That it is, yeah. But we pay attention that we really have white only. We don't use other colored ones because it's more unique. If in the green and in the stones here, you have just these white eyes gleaming in the light. My wife is very fond of white.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
While the back of this garden is pretty impressive with all the bears, elephants, alligators, and fanciful parterres, I was also taken by the simplicity of the front garden to this garden home. This front garden with its simple green and white motif reminds me of an important part of the garden home concept that bears repeating, blurring the lines between inside and outside. A mostly gray and white color palette awaits us at Old Westbury Gardens in Long Island. We'll take a tour in just a bit, but next it's all about color in this field of geraniums, so stay with us. Because the weather can be so unpredictable, the flowers we plant in our gardens have to be tough and resilient. Creating new varieties with these qualities in mind is exactly what's going on here in Germany. For instance, these are Ivy geraniums, and they represent some of the best in breeding. And Gary Falkenstein tells us more. Why do you think the Ivy geranium will become more popular in the United States?
Well, I think for one part, the cascades and blizzards are very heat tolerant, and they're carefree, and if they're planted in a container, which container gardening is catching on so much now in the United States and in Europe, they're really virtually maintenance free, and they'll give you more color in about any plant there is.
I know the Ivy geranium has been a mainstay in Europe for years. How does it size up to the American market?
The double-flowered ivies in North America are extremely popular, and I think it's mostly by the way the grower grows them and presents them. They want to grow them in these large hanging baskets, take them to the retailer, and then the customer buys them in this manner. When they try to grow these cascades, the singles, they shed their flowers. They're self-cleaning, and this is a problem for the grower because it falls on the crops below, and by the time he delivers it to the retail, the flowers are gone. On the contrary, over here in Europe, where they really understand the differences in the varieties, the gardener goes after these cascades in very small pots, 4-inch and 5-inch pots. They plant them in a garden, they're very vigorous, and in no time at all they're full of color. A good example on the cascade and blizzard types in Europe, over 400 million are purchased every year.
Really?
In the US, about 4 million.
When you drive through Europe, one of the most beautiful aspects of these wonderful villages and towns are the window boxes. And a big part of the window box is the Ivy geranium.
That's correct. That's correct. In fact, I think most all the window boxes I've seen as I've gone through Europe, Bavaria, Switzerland, are the cascade and blizzard types. And they're just totally carefree.
So if Americans want to bring that charm to their gardens and add window boxes to their homes, certainly the Ivy geranium would be a perfect choice for that sort of composition.
Perfect choice, perfect choice.
When it comes to flowers, is bigger really better? Well, I think it certainly is when you're considering the shade. The larger the flowers, the more they sparkle in the dim light. And that's particularly true with some of these new varieties of New Guinea Impatiens.
Alan, the Sonics were bred with primarily two major objectives. The first being outside or garden performance, and then for flower size.
Well, you certainly accomplished it with that. Look at the size of these blooms.
Aren't they gorgeous?
Gosh, they look like they're on steroids.
The unique thing about the New Guinea, the Sonics, is that because we select them on fully exposed outdoor trials, New Guineas, which are traditionally more of a shade plant, can really grow in an exposure that's really quite sunny. Irrigation is the primary thing.
Right, so you can grow this plant in full sun, and as long as you have plenty of moisture in the soil, they'll perform beautifully.
Exactly.
I enjoyed so much being in that color. It was almost electrifying. But I have to say, I also enjoy the simple, quiet beauty of the color white. I'll show you how this German family uses white inside and out, and how I use this simple color palette in my garden home. You won't want to miss this, so stay tuned. Welcome back. I'm Alan Smith. Today's show was inspired by a trip to Germany. And a little earlier, I showed you that amazing garden full of topiary. So I thought what we might do is show you how to create one yourself. It's really quite simple, particularly if you use this wonderful ivy. It's easy to care for, and it's such a vigorous grower. So what I wanted to do is show you how to take some ivy and create a wonderful whimsical topiary like we saw in Germany. Now you'll want to start with a wire form. You can use chicken wire like we saw at Wolfgang's, or you can use a form designed for topiary like this one. This is one that I found at a garden show several years ago, and it's come in really handy. And as you can see, I've anchored it in this container, and I've filled it with a soil blend designed for container gardening. Now, really all you have to do from here is plant the ivy. And I'm using some 6-inch pots of ivy, and what I'm doing is I'm going to position them where I take advantage of the longest vine or the longest tendril, and that would be this one. So once it's planted, you see, I will tie it around this stem like this, and then I'll bring some others and get them started where they'll all begin to grow vertically. Now, a couple other little tips you might want to keep in mind. What I like to do is trim the edges, so I'm directing all the growth up. And if you start early enough in the season with, say, 2 or 3 pots of ivy this size, you can grow it up and into the orb and completely fill it out in one growing season. All right, now let's shift gears and talk about color. I'm always inspired by colors, but sometimes it's the absence of color that grabs my eye. You see, less is more, you might say. That was my thinking when I laid out my fountain garden. You see, I wanted to fill the garden full of all white flowers, such as the roses, white American Beauty, and iceberg. These flowers just sparkle against the dark evergreen backdrop of the holly hedges. During a trip to Old Westbury in Long Island, I encountered a garden with many of the same plants that I love in my fountain garden. Let me take you there for a look around. Now, before we start focusing on the gray plantings they've created here, let's take a look at the overall composition of this garden room, because it reflects many of the principles of design that go into creating a beautiful garden space. First, I think it's important to recognize that this garden is completely enclosed. And this has been achieved by the use of a collection of evergreen shrubs and trees. At the back, we have a pair of tall conical hollies, as well as a low border of English yew. And then on the sides, there are hollies and boxwoods and yews that complete the enclosure. Now, this is an intimate space, and it's only made that way because of these walls, if you will, that establish the parameters of this garden room. The other aspect of this garden that I think that really gives it great charm is that it has a definite entry, which directs the visitor. And that entry is punctuated by a pair of large round hollies, and then supported by a pair of charming lambs on each side. Similar points of punctuation can be found repeated at the back of the border, where a focal point, a beautiful garden bench, is framed. All of these principles of design can be found working together in this relatively small space. You see, this garden is only about 40 feet wide and 60 feet long. Now, what I like about this garden is that you have a rigid, somewhat formal framework that defines the space, and then you have this marvelous effusive planting that works with it. It's a beautiful marriage. Let's look at some of the plants. I love this gray-leafed Eleamus glauca in combination with eucalyptus. The plantings are finished off with tropical plants, which aren't cold hardy. They don't last through the winter, but they add so much to the composition. They include the eucalyptus, as I mentioned before, as well as some salvias and this beautiful plectranthus. As you can see, this garden isn't dominated by flowers. Rather, it's the interplay of this silvery gray and glaucous foliage that creates the magic in this space. It's so serene and tranquil, I could just sit here all day. Now, earlier I showed you the amazing topiary garden created by Dr. Wolfgang Borchardt and his wife. I was also impressed by their front garden, which follows this white theme. And I liked how they carried this theme from the front door inside the house. Their living room is a minimalist dream. It's amazing how you get the same crisp feeling outdoors as you do inside their home. And if you'd like more ideas on how to use color in your garden and home, check out my website. It's pallensmith.com. That's also where you can submit viewer questions, and each week on the show, I'll answer them. You know, roses are a never-ending source of questions, and today I wanted to address this one from a viewer outside Chicago. Sarah writes, "For the first year I've grown roses. Now that they've bloomed, what do I do?" Well, you need to focus on several things at once, Sarah. You need to think about feeding, watering, and controlling problems. Let's take feeding first. There are 2 ways to feed, with dry plant food and liquid fertilizer. With dry plant food, you work it into the ground and it becomes available to the roots when you water the plant. Dry fertilizer can be organic, and I like to integrate some of this organic matter when I first dig the hole for the roses in order to give them a jump start. Now, another type of fertilizer is liquid, and this can be applied through foliar feedings, where the substance is sprayed onto the plant, or this can be watered into the soil. Some roses don't respond to foliar feedings because it causes them to produce lots of leaves and few blooms, so be careful. When it comes to watering roses, you might want to use soaker hoses or some sort of drip irrigation system. This keeps moisture from getting on the leaves of the foliage. which can tend to harbor disease such as black spot and powdery mildew. Now, it's important to keep in mind that roses that are well watered and fed will be stronger and more disease resistant than those that go thirsty or hungry over a long hot summer. If your roses do have problems with insects or disease, it's never too late to start treating them. Insecticidal soaps are safe and they're a natural way to go. You just want to spray them on the onset of a breakout. Okay, now let's talk about pruning. You see, there are different pruning techniques for the many types of roses out there, such as climbing, hybrid teas, shrubs. You may not realize it, but on many roses you'll want to leave the spent buds on the plant to produce those beautiful hips for the winter. These are bright red berries that are particularly attractive to birds. Not all roses produce hips, and since there's so many types of roses out there, I won't go into the different varieties now, but I do have a list of hip producers on my website that you can check out. In fact, roses are a favorite topic of mine, and you can find a wealth of information at palensmith.com. Okay, after the break, some info on sauerkraut as we continue this German-inspired show, so don't go away. This is the portion of the show where I feature a recipe, so I tried to come up with something that fit our German theme, something that would come out of a German garden. So what could be better than sauerkraut? Now you realize sauerkraut is fermented cabbage, and I know that may not sound particularly good, but I love it, particularly on a Reuben sandwich. My Aunt Jenny has a recipe that her mother, my grandmother, handed down to her for making sauerkraut, and it really is delicious. She makes it the old-fashioned way and packs it away in quart mason jars. Okay, so you don't have a lot of cabbage, time, or really the patience to make your own sauerkraut. Well, you can pick it up at the grocery store or a specialty shop. But if you happen to want to give it a try, you can pick up a few recipes on my website along with Aunt Jenny's. Just check it out. Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. I hope you enjoyed seeing those beautiful gardens from Germany, and along the way picked up some tips on using color in your garden. Just remember, keep it bold and simple. Until next time, from the garden, I'm Alan Smith.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.